Hi there, I am Chris Gazdick, since 1995, a mental health and substance abuse therapist, and we've got him back for his rotation. He's right over there, Mr. Craig Graves. How are you, sir?
I'm doing good, man.
That's good. Good
doing
to see
good,
you here.
Chris.
Good to see you here, man.
Thank you, sir.
You have landed at Through a Therapist's Eyes, where we talk about myths and stereotypes, disseminate a lot of information about mental health and substance abuse. We give you personal insights directly from a therapist in personal time in your car or your home. See the world through the lens of a therapist here, but be aware that this is not the delivery of therapy services in any way. This is Through a Therapist's Eyes, where you can contact us. Contact at throughatherapist'seyes.com. We interact with you. We engage with you. It's a good way to connect with us. 5-star reviews are important. I thank you really for internationally hanging with us, growing with us, learning with us. It's really been a fun journey to continue with you guys, and we love doing it. But it helps us to get those 5-star reviews really to pop up whatever the techno people tell us it's helpful for. Apple iTunes, you could do some reviews on there. That seriously helps us to go. And we got the merch button now. You had mentioned. We talked about the hat that I got. Man, you got to get the jigsaw puzzle. I've been talking about the jigsaw puzzle.
Jigsaw puzzle?
Yeah, man.
Wow.
Yeah, it's Neil's brainchild. It's a jigsaw puzzle to go up to 1,000 pieces, maybe 500. You could do it as a kid puzzle.
No kidding.
But it says on there, let's figure this thing out together, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's
that's cool.
The phrase, the jigsaw. Yeah. I think I'm going to get one for my lobby. That'll be cool.
Yeah, that's pretty neat.
I think so. So this is the human emotional experience, and we do endeavor to figure this thing out together. So let's rock and roll, man. We're going to talk about blame tonight, which I think it's funny because it's one of those ones. I've got several ones that are sort of conceptual in basis, and it applies to most all of us. I mean, I've said several times I really design our shows when I'm prepping and thinking about the show to apply to as many people. And there's some, like we do tonight, who doesn't engage in blaming others, right? How does it operate? What effects does it have? Where does it come from? Why do we do this? How to avoid it? Those are some of the things that we're going to be talking about tonight. So pretty excited about this one. On top of last week, we had the rationalization show. Was that last week? Neil, give me a head nod. Rationalizations. Why do we rationalize things so much? So I thought 2 in a row would be a nice playoff of that show, actually, because, tune back to last week and then tune to this one. You'll see how they kind of coordinate together a little bit. So let's get your stuff out there, Mr. Graves. You are now the bona fide Mr. Unbeatable Mind coach. Yeah. What is that? How do they find you? Give them some contact info.
Yeah, speaking of blaming, it's mindset training.
Okay.
It's kind of life coaching based on mindset. And so we go through a lot of standard stuff that other coaches would, but we use the power of our minds to help us get ahead. Wininyourmind.com is my website, and you can find out more information there.
Yep. You been enjoying it?
Yeah.
I like to say
it's a lot of fun.
I like to say, guys, you had like what was it, like a year, 2 years training doing the show, picking up all the mental health facets, and that's
learned a lot on the show, and coaching's a lot like leadership, and I've been in a lot of leadership positions in my past. So yeah, man, it's great. I love that. I love that kind of stuff.
So he's trained, certified, ready to go. International? Yeah, I thought so. Yeah, you can really do some international stuff. Have you had an international coachee? What do you call them?
I haven't had an international coachee, but
Yeah.
Another guy that's in the program with me did some coaching for me, and he's in Germany.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that's pretty neat. So really, if you're over the pond and you want to work with some unbeatable mindset coaching, he's your man. And like I said, he's trained, certified, the whole 9 yards with the Unbeatable Mind program. But also, I'd like to throw in there, like, you've been dealing with mental health through this show for a while, so I think that really gives you a bit of an edge.
Yeah.
He gives you a little bit of a
learned a lot here on the show, man. Yeah, I did, for sure.
So what do you know about blame?
Good times. There's a lot of blame. People blame a lot.
They really do.
A lot, I hope the politicians are watching the show. You know?
Nice.
There's always somebody else to blame.
Little political edge. Yeah, true.
Yeah.
Though you're right. That's an interesting thing. I mean, how ingrained is it in life? Through our views with policies and procedures. I would say, at workplace, gosh, how much blame goes on when administration and these evil people behind the curtain making me do stuff I don't want to do, and certainly in relationships, right?
Yeah.
We'll have a little segment on marriage, for sure, and just a lot of areas. And part of what I want you to get from listening here is the effects. Like, what does this do in your life? Let me set up a thought process. You might even type in the live, right? Like, what do you think this does when you get into a state of blame? Is it good? Is it bad? I mean, I guess you can assume it's generally bad, but getting in touch with, like, what does it do to me when I fall into blaming other people for most of anything? Yeah, I would say, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's get into it, man. Blame is, default, right? Or definition. To find fault with, to hold responsible, to place responsibility for. Pretty straightforward, but I thought it was cool when I dug a little further in what we're talking about when really what is blame. You got to really appreciate I didn't catch cold with asking you what is blame.
What?
You know how I like to catch people cold, and you've always driven nuts by.
Yeah, I'm glad you have that written down here.
It's coming. I'll catch you with one somewhere, man.
I'm sure you will.
Picking your brain. But, I mean, it also is interesting because they came, if you look more into the depth of what is happening, when you have elements of blame kind of at play, it's also an expression of disapproval or reproach. And if you think about if I'm blaming something, am I reproaching them? And that word is rebuke, like I rebuke you. You think like, well, I'm blaming Craig for being late today. It's why we started late or whatever. Well, I'm just making that up. I'm rebuking you? Dang, that's a little harsh, but it's a synonym, right? So off the get-go, when I thought about what is blame, do you think, Craig, people really know what they're doing with those added words when they're blaming somebody for something? Do you think people think about rebuking them or being in reproach of them? Like, those are terse words.
I'm not sure they think about those words and, specifically, but I think there probably are times when rebuke is appropriate. But, I think rebuke and blame may be different things. If I'm trying to think of a good example and one's not coming to mind, but people do make mistakes. And sometimes it's appropriate to call people out for those mistakes.
Interesting thought.
Yeah, right? I think there are situations, though, where we try to deflect the attention on ourselves and we blame others when we had a part in whatever it is.
Which is why I'm going to pull Neil here in a little bit in just a second, so you can get ready, Neil. I mean, you just transitioned us, but I don't want to transition yet. The reflecting, the redirecting. This is where we talked about last week, rationalizing. So blame as a defense and blame in much the ways that we talked about, just last week. But to stay here for just another minute, right, like they are different words, rebuke and blame. But if you look at the definition that we just talked about, hold responsible for, to place responsibility for, right? Like, is it good? Is it bad to blame somebody? Well, hold on. It's not all bad, because you bring up a point that I would sprinkle into the show. Isn't it appropriate to do that sometimes?
It is, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're going to hold people responsible for sometimes something they did to you or something that you're going to hold them accountable to or an agreement that you and I made. Let's go there, right? Like you and I made an agreement. We're going to record on Thursday night about 5:30, 6 o'clock. Mm-hmm. Let's just say you didn't show up. Well, is it not appropriate to like say, hey, Craig, we had an agreement. You didn't come. can I rely on you to set a time next time that we'll do this? Well, I'm blaming you, right? Kinda. I'm holding you accountable.
I mean, what's the definition of blame again? I mean, there's some
Right.
accountability there too, right? If
Exactly.
I don't call and don't show up, then hey, man, what happened? Were you in a car accident? Could be something that legitimately happened.
Of course.
Nah, man, I was just hanging out at the house watching football,
Yeah. The definition:
drinking beer, whatever.
to find fault with, to hold responsible, to place responsibility for.
Yeah.
So there's some elements
So
there.
maybe by definition, blame is. But I think about blame being something that could be or is my fault, but I'm trying to project that on somebody else.
That's not what the definition says. But I think you're right. The way we understand the process of blaming somebody,
Yeah.
absolutely incurs that connotation, but it's not all that.
Well, maybe it's maybe the definition's changed. It seems to be that some words their definitions are being changed.
They do, really.
Maybe just blaming such a common thing now. We've changed the terminology.
That's why I like words and talk about definition a lot in the beginning. So, because what are we talking about?
Yeah.
A lot of times people have an understanding of something, but subconsciously or in our culture, there are multiple components that we're in operation on.
Right. Yeah. I'm trying to think of a good example of something that's not political that would be a blame scenario.
Well, like I said,
Versus,
I can blame you for not showing up on time, or you can blame your employer for not giving you.
Yeah, and I was on time, by the way.
Well, I made that example.
But I get it. So I don't know. I think that blame. When I think about blame, that definition sounds legit in some ways. But when I think about blame, I think about it as a bad thing. Because I think about it, I'm deflecting my responsibility in the situation onto somebody else.
Right. So that's a good transition. Neil, do you remember talking last week, about rationalizing? I mean, we took a pretty deep dive on like exactly what you're talking about, and my brain was really thinking about that and how that really correlates in much the same way when we're blaming.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to what Craig said, is that the negative connotation, just like when you hear someone that's rationalizing it, it's become a negative connotation. I think blame's gone the same way, where to me, when you guys say blame, I'm thinking of my two kids, because I know my oldest, he never takes the blame. It's always his little brother's fault.
Of course.
And so
it's a perfect example.
That's that negative. But there's a lot of times when, each kid has situations where they need to be blamed for the situation because they were responsible for what happened. But then it goes back to what Craig said, that negative connotation, because the oldest is trying to deflect the blame to the youngest.
It's a perfect example. You must be living in my house. Like we make jokes because we got ghosts lives in my house.
Yeah, and I think maybe the kids is a good example. Yeah. Because if let's say when your boys grow up and they got a curfew. Let's say they're driving cars. The curfew's midnight. Let's say one boy's out by himself. He didn't come home by midnight. So then that's a rebuke. Hey, son, where you been? You got a midnight curfew.
Right.
Now those boys are together and miss curfew, and they come home and they say, "Well, I told him we needed to get home, but he didn't listen, and that's why we're late. It's not my fault. It's his fault." Right. That's what I think about when I think about blame.
Yeah, it's a perfect little
and I think younger kids are a great example because it's not as serious as, say, when adults pass blame at work or something like that. So you kind of see like you said, if Luke and Mason were out at night, they came home late, it'd be Mason would be like, "Well, Luke wanted to go to Taco Bell to get a slushie." Wait, you're driving. It's your responsibility to get back by midnight.
Yeah, I think the kid example. So maybe you're working on a project at work, and you miss a deadline. It's not my fault. I told Neil to have the presentation ready, and he didn't.
Right.
It's not my fault. It's Neil's fault.
Yeah, but Craig didn't give me the information for that presentation.
So that's blame.
And
that's
there
the way
you
I
go
blame.
back and forth with double-binded blame. Now, that's not a real term. I just kind of made it up. But you can get into, and we're going to talk about here, blame shifting. That's the formal term for it. You're shifting. But double-binded, when people in our complicated adult lives go back and forth with that, not wanting to take responsibility on a team, not wanting to take responsibility for something that you did, not being accountable for a commitment that you had or an obligation that you had. And those are where it isn't a kid thing. This can be a serious level.
It can be. And on the other side of that, though, rebuke is the parent who's saying, hey, you guys weren't home on time. Or the boss who's saying, hey, I asked you guys to complete this project by this. What happened?
And we're going to touch on marriage if we have as we go. When this enters into like serious relationships as, employee boss or partner, business partner to business partner, or husband to wife, these can get pretty sticky. Now you're rebuking, when you blame your spouse, did you realize you're rebuking them? Hold on. I don't know that we want that there. So that's a little bit of foreshadowing. The main point here is, like we talked a lot about last week, there's a lot of self-defense, and we took a deep dive, so I'm not going to spend much more time on talking about how it relates to rationalizing things, because we took a deep dive last time. Tune into that one and then come back to this one, because, man, you're defending yourself, and a lot of psychological dynamics come into that when you're really engaged in a relationship with somebody, and the concept that we're talking about here, blame, comes into the mix. And just listen to when we get to, like, the effects, right? Hey, that sounds like a good transition. What effects come from this? What does it really do in the life that you have with somebody, the partnership, the relationship?
It creates distrust, and you're not going to trust that person.
On point, as always.
Yeah.
Big impact. I think that's on my list somewhere. Destroys your ability to be trustworthy or to be to extend trust. Mm-hmm. It's such a negative force when you're doing this defending of yourself or shifting, as we're going to talk about. Man, you really destroy the dynamics. So you're talking about being out of contact or connection or in tune. That's what we want to do in relationships. You just throw a hammer into the wrench. Mm-hmm. A hammer and a wrench into the wheel. How about that?
Yeah.
So what is blame shifting? I did have this, where did it come from? Psychology Today. I haven't used the Psychologist or Psychology Today sites in a little while, so it was actually kind of cool to land on some of those when I was thinking about these things. And actually they brought up the idea of the term blame shifting. I mean, I heard it before, but it fit with what I was thinking about with rationalizing that we talked about last time. Basically, it's emotionally abusive behavior. They learned to use strong language when they were talking about this idea of blame shifting.
What is blame shifting?
Okay.
I'm assuming you got a definition there.
Basically, to escape responsibilities. That's what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. Gets even weirder when it's double-binded. You're doing it to me, and I'm doing it to you, and we just kick that back and forth. Oh, gosh, that's a lot.
Well, that's usually the way it goes, right? I mean...
It can.
Yeah.
It can, but interesting, is it usually the way that it goes? I don't know that it is. Particularly when you get into abusive relationships, they're not really shifting it back and forth.
Maybe abusive relationships are different, but
I would say boss employee. Your employees. When there's a power structure, either formal or informal, power differentials, and marriages have a lot of struggle with that. That'd be a whole show in and of itself. When there's power differentials, when you're in a relationship with somebody, you have to learn how to share power, give and take back and forth. You have the idea this time. I have the idea.
Yeah, but I don't, if somebody lays some blame out there, who's going to say, yeah, you're right? Yeah, it was my fault. Most people are not going to do that. Most
not
people are
so
going to
much,
come
but
back
they're going to shut down.
Could be that.
They're going to shut down.
Could be.
They're going to run. They're going to avoid. And if it happens enough repetitively, they're actually in abusive relationships going to start incorporating, I do screw things up. I'm really not a good communicator. I don't know what I'm doing with parenting. You'll start incorporating, I'm a really bad employee. I'm bottom of the heap here on this. I got to pick it up. Something's wrong with me. It can get pretty deep.
Yeah, I guess it could be. But I think probably the way I would envision that, though, is somebody blames, somebody defends himself and lays, blames the other way.
Yeah.
And that's probably the start of most arguments.
A lot.
It'd
be interesting to see what kind of percentage of arguments are started with this kind of thing. I think that's an interesting thought. So blame shifting, though, abusers have difficulty taking responsibility for their problems. Projection, we talked about that on the show, I think, before. Projection of the blame, right, towards relationships. People have a difficulty, putting this on to their partner. They don't know they're doing it, but they do it. Blame shifting or blaming the victim is a form of, switching and making the other person feel crazy. I was just talking about that. So this blame shifting thing, an example of that is gaslighting. And I know you think that's only in abusive relationships, but we'll kind of like play games a little bit with people, I'll consistently have an issue in marriage, let's just say, and I'll maybe start spinning it in a way to take the pressure off of me. I think people, definitely fall into strong examples of this with abusive relationships, but I think people have a hard time doing what you help people to do, to be mindful of themselves, to do self-examination, to really look at, like you said, how many people say, oh, yeah, maybe I do have something there that I need to look at. In our simple little example, you're probably going to be like, avoid the topic of being late, which you weren't, but avoid the imaginary topic of being late. Well, I wasn't really that late. I ran into some traffic or whatever. You're not shifting it back at me, but you're trying to avoid the hurt that we feel when we're blamed. So blame shifting can be really, really troublesome. Really, really depthy when you get into that effect. That's just one effect. So, yeah, I made the point. This can be way more common than what you think of as the super destructive forms that we're kind of talking about with abusive relationships. But I went with this article. I'm curious. I'll fly through this. Other effects, and then I'll do my own list a little bit. But I found this to be a little convoluted in the way that they were talking about the psychological kind of aspects of blame. And then I got to thinking about it. Well, why am I feeling that way with their examples of the effects of blame? And I got to thinking, this is difficult, or we're taking a deeper dive on this. This is depthy. This is like the emotional experience when you're in a blaming situation. I was just reflecting on the weirdness that this is if you really look at it closely. Why am I doing this? What am I not wanting to face about myself? Why am I redirecting something I may or may not have done or contributed to the problem? Like, there's a lot there. And again, we took a deep dive last week, but listen to their things. They had, these articles, right? 7 effects of blaming kind of thing. So real quick through it, true self-worth and genuine empowerment. Okay, you don't have self-worth or genuinely feel empowered when you're blaming other people. Okay,
so these are the
article.
These are the things about the blamer.
Yeah, correct. Okay. The effects of blaming.
Okay, the effects of blaming on the individual who is placing blame.
Yeah, and usually I have my list matches up with what I kind of take a glance at articles with. It didn't really this time as much. It was interesting in my brain thinking about it. So secondly, creates and continues dependency. I had to actually think about it, and I added an explanation for this one. So I looked at what that means is looking at self can create anxiety, right? Like we seek distraction, we feel alone and confused and misunderstood. I think that's what they mean by creates and continues dependency, right? Distracts from self-reflection. Okay, I got that one. That was cool. I think I had that on my list. When you're blaming somebody else, an effect is you're distracting from really reflecting on, all right, what is my piece in this? So that one made perfect sense to me. Creates helplessness and powerlessness. I thought, okay, if you think about it, you're blaming the other person. Well, you can control yourself, can't control the other person, right? So it does foster helplessness. It fosters powerlessness when you're engaged in blaming somebody else. It's a different take on the angle. And then they said, can reflect global thinking. So, when you're blaming other people, you might be falling into, I used the word stereotypes, like if I'm an employer and employees just don't care about the company, that's a stereotype I might have. So they talked about, following global thinking. And then lastly, prevents or developing resiliency to better handle life's challenges. So when you're blaming somebody else, you're not really creating a lot of resiliency. You're beating your own internal resiliency down. So that's a weird list, isn't it? I mean, how does those things? I see your face. I'm not sure. You have to check the YouTube out.
It sounds like to me you could sum it all up in one thing.
Okay, what's that?
Covering your own ass. CYA.
Yeah. I think I said the word convoluted because it's kind of like there's some psychological things going on there with some of their points. And, to go deeper on that, you really have to check the article out, which you might want to do.
Yeah, and it may be interesting to read, but it sounds to me like if those things are happening, it's more on a subconscious level. I'm just trying to get the focus off me so I don't get in trouble or I don't look bad.
CYA.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. I mean, you said this list didn't line up with yours, so what were you thinking?
Yeah, I was thinking, and they ended up with with creating more blame. That's your back and forth.
Yeah.
Was their last thing on their list. I blame you, so you blame me. We just, go nuclear with blame. I was thinking about, this is hurtful. The effect of blaming somebody is you're being hurtful to them. Right? The effect of being condescending to a person when you're really blaming them. Now, condescension is showing a feeling of patronizing superiority. I'm here, you're there. On the cameras, you can see
I think
upper, you're lower.
Yeah, that's kind of right?
Yeah, I think so.
I didn't mess up. You know? You're the one that messed up.
I'm on point. You screwed up.
Yeah.
So you're really kind of falling into some condescension.
Yes.
What I have next. And I made the point. I'll come back to it. This is where judge and jury, the subtitle really comes back. So I'll circle back there. I also thought, it sets up automatically an adversarial relationship.
Yeah, oh yeah, definitely.
If I'm blaming you, I'm immediately making you an adversary.
I'm on the defensive.
Immediately.
What do you mean? I wasn't late.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then lastly, I came up with is not conductive to truly problem solving. It's not finding a win-win in our little problem that we have at this moment.
Yeah.
You're going in, I win, you lose.
Yeah.
I'm blaming you.
Right.
And you suck.
As you were talking there, I was thinking ego, that word popped in my head. You're
a good word.
Protecting the ego, because I didn't mess up, you did.
And you can see where that goes deep in abusive relationships. That can go real hard, with really destructive people with massive insecurities inside them.
Yeah.
And stuff. So,
yeah.
I mean, do you see their list was, I don't know, it was like sort of psychologically, subconsciously almost.
Yeah, I think all those things are subconscious on that list, if they happen at all. Who knows?
Yeah, and I feel like mine, I was thinking more overt, direct, unintended consequences maybe, but boy, so just think of that whole list of effects. I don't think you're thinking about that
when you blame
somebody.
You just want to get the heat off of you, protect your own ego.
But look at what you're doing.
Make yourself not look bad.
Yeah. But look at what you're doing to the other person.
Well, you don't care.
But I think you do. Like, you want to be a good employer, and you don't want to tear somebody apart. You want to be a good spouse, and you don't want to do these things. But really stop and maybe even rewind this and listen to those effects again. Because I don't think people are intending to do all of that. I think you're right. I think they're just trying to CYA.
Yeah.
But the effects, man, this can hit people. This can hit hard. This can be a hard hitter. And again, part of the point of the show is this happens a lot. It happens a lot. And maybe soon we'll be touching on marriage. This happens a lot in close relationships. This happens a lot in families. We're all grown up, we're kids, but I blame my brother for not doing the Christmas thing right, or you didn't do the chicken for, who does a chicken for Thanksgiving anyway? I'm blaming you for not following tradition. I mean, we throw this stuff around like a lot, and I don't think we realize it, and I don't think that we realize the effects of it. So part of the purpose of the show is to pay attention to this, because you could be doing some damage to your relationships. So let me circle back around that. What do you take? Here's your catch cold moment. What do you take from the title? Blame is judge and jury.
Well, I think that when people, if you mean the person who is laying blame, that he's
Right.
He's the judge, he's the jury, you're guilty. He's not.
Yeah. I feel like that term came to my mind. Who wants to be judge and jury? That expression has a.
Don't we really all though? Don't we really all want to be judge and jury? Don't we always want to be right? We don't want it to be our fault.
Yes and yes.
I think most people probably operate in that space, and I think the ones who don't probably falter at times, and I
don't think I've ever heard somebody say, "I want to be judge and jury right here, man."
What, do you not want to be judge and jury?
No, I don't think you do either, because that has a connotation. I know you don't.
Well, I'm saying whether you do it or not is a different story. But yeah, we don't want to take. It makes us look bad. I'm not saying I do that. I'm not saying I blame. I'm not saying you blame or Neil or anybody else. But man, it's much easier if we do that, right, than take ownership of these situations.
Well, I would go so far. I'll just speak for myself. I know that I fall into these traps. It sucks. I don't like to admit that. I really don't like to admit that, because look at the effects. But I think that we do all do that. And the expression judge and jury is more crystallized based in the effects that we just talked about.
Yeah.
And nobody really wants to be in that position. I don't want the power of being judge and jury, even literally like in a courtroom. That's why we have separation of power, separation of control, separation of decision making, so that we come together, right?
Yeah, but I think probably that's a legal thing, and you're right. We don't want that. We want the judge and the jury to be separate.
Yeah,
obviously. But in our own personal lives, how hard is it to admit you're wrong?
Very.
It is.
Very.
It really is. I told you the story. I've told the story on the show about my first marriage counseling experience.
Yeah, I just shared that with a friend or somebody.
And I'm like, we're gonna get this thing fixed up. Everything's gonna be great. And I was like, wow. After listening to the guy, I'm like, wow. I got some responsibilities here too. I got to take ownership of some of this stuff myself. I can't just lay all the blame on her.
Yep.
I got some stuff going on too, and I think that people are. There was a book that I read. I think it was one of Dale Carnegie's books, and human beings will try to justify their actions to the end.
We do. Which again, we took a deep dive on rationalizations. It goes back to that. I'm sorry to mention that so much, but I think that they really blend in so well together. That's why I followed that up with this topic today. It's a powerful trap that I think that we really get into. Mm-hmm. It's damaging.
Yeah, I think it's human nature. There was in that book, he used an example. I'm pretty sure it was Dale Carnegie, and it was probably written back in the 30s. And there was this guy who had killed the police officer, and he was trying to justify why he had done that.
Oh wow!
Yeah, it's just it's madness. But in this guy's mind, he didn't have any other choice. He was trying to justify his actions. And I think that we all do that to some extent.
Yeah, I don't know why I'm thinking about marriage so much with this. I think because it just happens a lot in the emotion-focused therapy model when you become insecure with the abandonment or the engulfment, respectively, both. Back to your ego, like you've got to protect yourself almost. Like you're in a state of fear. It's fight or flight, and I don't want to be crushed by you. And so I can't take responsibility in my fear state, so I'll throw it at you.
Yeah. I think it's hard for people to admit that they are wrong. And I think we live, our society glorifies greatness. And, if you make a mistake or a bad decision or do something wrong, then, you're beating yourself up because you're not one of the great ones, know, and stuff like that. And it's ridiculous, and it plays out in a lot of places in our culture, Here
in a little while, I'm going to use the idea of an anecdote again to blaming. And I came up with, I think I came up with humility, being able to do exactly what you're saying we struggle with in a humble way, realize like, dude, gosh, we put so much pressure on ourselves to be perfect. I mean, it's Facebook, it's perfect parent, perfect dad, perfect mom, want to be the best employee. I want to look good with my grass in my neighborhood. I mean, there's so many pressure points that we put on ourselves. Like, guys, gals, if you hear nothing in this show, understand this is probably a major takeaway here of allow yourself to make mistakes. You lose guard against the idea of perfectionism. And to a man and a woman and a child and an elderly person, I think we all fall into those traps. I think you're on point.
Yeah. I think humility is underutilized. Is that a right word?
I was going to say the exact word.
Yeah.
You went much further.
You know,
we're struggling with that word.
You know, we talked about Jocko Willink on our show, or on the show many times before in the past when I was a co-host.
You have.
His book is Extreme Ownership. You know, he talks a lot about ego getting in the way, and he's looking at it from a leadership standpoint in organizations and the lessons he learned in the SEAL teams. And when we talk about, you know, organizations and you know, I guess you could say marriages and other aspects of life.
Yeah.
You know, you take ownership of the issues, but you don't say, oh yeah, I take ownership. You come with solutions. So how can we prevent whatever happened from happening in the past, happening in the future? And he does a great TED Talk. If you've never seen Jocko's TED Talk, it's amazing.
I have not.
It's awesome. It's really good.
I might ask you to forward that to me.
About a situation when he was in Iraq of an extreme ownership example. And so like, let's just say, for example, Neil has the volume turned off and he's not recording.
Oh, dear.
And so you go through a whole show and Neil doesn't record. So you've wasted an hour and didn't get anything, whatever.
Thankfully, that's never
and
happened.
You could say, well, dadgum, Neil, what'd you do, man? You screwed this thing up, you loser, whatever. Or you could say, you know what? This is my show. I own this thing. I'm the guy. This is me. How can we prevent this from happening in the future? In the future, Neil, we're going to make sure that we do a sound check, have a checklist or whatever. But you go into that situation with, I'm the leader of this. I take ownership of what happened. Here's what we're going to do to prevent it from happening in the future.
I'm actually thinking through. I mean, ever I use personal examples. I don't mean to glorify anything because I screw this stuff up all the time. Make no mistake about it. But I think that happened with me and you before, and I want to use this as a really good example of our relationship. There was a time when you did the background stuff before, and I don't remember what it was, but there was a major glitch. And we had to kind of do some repairs or whatever. And I think actually you were already on point. You were like, well, here's what we're going to do. Here's what I'm going to try to do. Can we re-record this section or something? And I'm like, oh, absolutely. No problem, man. I mean, this happened. I think I said something like, dude, this is the first time we've ever had any kind of thing. This is fantastic. We've been awesome at this. Yeah, do you remember that? Am I making that up? Or I think
I had something. Thing. I think I had a ticker in the background or something. It was a garage band thing, a Mac thing. I think that's what you're talking about. Right, so as we're talking, it's going tick, tick, tick.
Yeah, it was
tick,
pretty.
Tick, tick, tick.
You're right. The whole show.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we fixed it. We figured it out, and it was okay.
Yeah.
But we could have got nasty with each other about that.
Right. And I think in a lot of situations, instead of getting upset, laying blame, letting emotions get involved, it could be a first-time thing. That's the first time that ever happened. We didn't see that coming.
Right.
We didn't see that coming. So
there's
no use in getting mad and, Craig, why'd you mess the show up? Or, blah, blah. It's just, hey, this happened. What do we do about fixing it?
And I want to follow that up with, again, I said a little bit ago, if you hear anything of the show, hear this. And this is a tag on to that. Right? Be allowing of yourself to make mistakes and extend that to the people that you're working with.
Yeah.
How about that, right? Like, give yourself permission to not be perfect, but people that you're working with, like, realize they're going to make mistakes, and that needs to be okay. In leadership positions, if you demand perfection, you're just going to be, oh, God, can you imagine that? We probably all come across people that seem that way.
Yeah.
That's a tough standard. Don't do that to somebody else.
You know, and I think a lot of problems, Chris, with blame and stuff like that is implicit versus explicit things, right? So implicit is something that you assume. So explicit are things that you've actually talked about.
Yep.
So rules that are actually set. So my implicits and your implicits may be completely different, you know? So if it's an explicit rule that's broken, then that's got to be talked about.
That's where the accountability comes in.
Yes. And I hit this with my kids a lot of times because they'll do something that I think is not proper or correct, but I've never actually had a conversation with them about this thing.
Perfect point.
So I'll say, hey, look, here's what happened. We've never talked about it, you know. Just so you know, if this happens again, it's going to be a problem. So now we're on the same page, and that's it.
That's awesome.
You know,
it's a good moment.
So it's
a really good teaching moment in a relationship, parent-child.
Yeah, and it could be whatever. It could be a business relationship. Or you keep going back to marriage, or you know, it could be those things too. I just have used this with my kids recently, and well, I mean, you know, they've grown. They're getting as they get older. You know,
oh yeah,
there's things you assume they may.
All the time.
There's things you assume they may know when they don't.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know,
absolutely. So let's look real quick at a little segment on the origins and whatnot that come out of this, and I thought this was interesting. So a lot of this is learned behavior, really. I think. So I talk about an overview of mental health. You've heard me mention before. A tale of two tapes, right? So an overview of mental health is on the one side, you've got biological realities, your brain, your amygdala limbic system, exercise, nutrition. We know anxiety, depression, there's a genetic reality. The biological body drives how we feel. But on the other side, you got the social and emotional, the primary life relationships, the primary life events, the daily stress, the grind, all of those sides. When we're talking about blame, we're really on this side. Right, so on the cameras and YouTube, you see the.
So what side are you on there?
Audio version is the social side.
Social.
The experiences that we've had, the relationships that we've had, the primary learning from other people is a big part of the origin of blame. You learn how to blame, or you learn accountability. You learn a sense of integrity. You learn a sense of self-examination. You really learn these things, or you don't. And so you had an excellent example there where you're teaching. I'm not blaming you, son or daughter, whichever it was. I'm not blaming you, kiddo. This is new. This is a problem. No problem right now. Just don't do it again. That's teaching. That's your kids learned from that moment. Whether they realized it or not, they learned, oh, Dad's not blaming me. He said I didn't even know this. That's awesome. But now we have to abide by that we got a new rule. Great. You know? So that's awesome. The origin of this is really those experiences in relationships, I feel like. Also, shame. Think about shame. We've done a show, I think, Shame Sucks. Maybe we haven't or we need to. When you're feeling a sense of shamefulness inside a lot or with any level, that's going to create your tendency to blame other people because you already feel shameful. You're already eating a lot of that energy inside. It stands to reason that, boom, that's going to spit out at the other person. And it creates a tendency or a sense of blame for others.
So you're saying we blame because we feel shame?
Yes.
Oh, interesting.
Yes.
Because I would say that you could also make someone feel shameful by blaming.
An interesting point. And then you probably get the double-binded shame. You know, so you blame creates blame, more blame back and forth, blame. Because of that, you're right. You're making somebody feel shameful as well as already feeling shameful yourself, and this stuff just gets kicked around back and forth. That's a good point. As well as a poor sense of self or self-esteem. Mm-hmm. That's another origination, similar to shame, but if you feel poorly about yourself, Man, that's a big orientation.
Yeah, I would say you would blame there to make yourself feel better.
Yeah.
You feel bad about yourself already.
Yeah.
And then you blame somebody else to take
on a
it
consuming
off, to take
level,
it off of you. Yeah.
When you're consumed with self-doubt and hurt, Casey likes to say hurt people. I mean, man.
100%, yeah.
That is an origin for blame. Massive insecurities, I said. I mentioned the EFT already. Think about the abusive person. Mm-hmm. Massive insecurities are going to create massive amounts of blame. This is where its origination comes from. A lack of self-soothing, a lack of self-resiliency inside. When you're not able to garner yourself into a grounded, whole state of self, you're not grounded. You're not feeling well. You're feeling all sorts of things, insecurities and shame and stuff. So when you can't calm yourself down inside, that is another orientation where it originates from. You're not well inside, so you throw it out at the other people. Hurt people. Interestingly, from the article, well, you actually already mentioned it. You mentioned it. You stole the thunder from the article. Feed the ego. Mm-hmm. You're feeding ego.
That's in your notes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was the last one on the origin of shame.
That's awesome.
From the article, yeah. I mean, you're just trying to see yourself as good. You're trying to. That is a starting place. When these things are kicking off, pay attention to that little list or this little segment, and then pay attention to the effects of what you're in danger of doing. And we're getting to, what do you do to prevent this, right? Does that sound interesting?
Yeah.
Because, man, it's building inside, and that's coming from you. And then you're doing it to somebody. And the effects when you do that ain't pretty a lot of times. Mm-hmm. Unless you're holding them accountable for something that was an agreement or explicit.
Yeah, and I think there is room for that. There's room for accountability. There's room for, I don't know if rebuke is a bad word, but there's room for accountability and for calling people out for doing things that we know aren't right.
I think rebuke even sounds a little terse, but you know what? If you punch me in the face, I'm going to rebuke you. I'm not cool with that. That's not all right.
You're probably going to do more than that. What is the definition of rebuke? Do we know that? Is it the same thing as accountability?
Be interesting. Neil, pop that up. Now I'll set us up for the next thing if you're able to. Real quick, because we've talked about it, listen to some of the marriage shows and take this piece of blame and pop it into your thinking when you review some of those things, because the emotion focused therapy that we talk about in episode 11 and 101, the insecurities are so strong in those close attachments. That is a setup for, it creates the energy that results in this horrible blame and blame shifting and double-binded blame, horrible stuff. Mm-hmm. I think I'm just going to leave it at that, because we kind of mentioned, it creates the defensiveness, it creates the lack of intimacy, it creates the lack of closeness, all that kind of stuff. So what's rebuke? What do we come up with?
Rebuke is to express sharp disapproval or criticism of someone because of their behavior or actions.
Yeah, the key word there to me seems criticism.
Yeah.
Being critical.
I feel like rebuke is you're mad at them and you're trying to point out what they did wrong, versus actually like pointing out the issue and then trying to like fix it or guide them. So like rebuke is just purely just the act of like yelling at someone because they did something wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah, rebuke sounds harsher than maybe holding somebody accountable. Definitely. What's the other word I used? I don't know.
I'm not sure.
Yeah. Rebuke sounds, he said sharp.
Yeah, sharp, critical, criticism.
Yeah.
What
do you mean you didn't record?
Yeah. And you didn't see it on the cameras there, but his eyes just glared at me across the room. I didn't even. That was that moment right there. If we freeze that and hyperanalyze that, which we do in therapy sometimes, that was uncomfortable.
Criticisms. There's a way to deliver something to somebody. We kind of disagreed on the mastermind call earlier this week about how to do that, but.
You had a disagreement about it?
Well, you and I did, I think, about if Neil failed to record, you could say, Neil, what are you doing, man? Good grief, we just spent an hour here doing this. Yeah. I can't believe you didn't record. Or you might say, Neil, You normally do a great job, man. You know, I appreciate you coming in here doing what you do. You get the shows published on time, but this time we didn't record, and that's a bit of a problem.
Yep.
You know, here's how we're going to fix it.
Good. Yeah, it's not a rebuke.
Yeah.
It's not really a criticism. You're leveling out, problem solving. You're approaching a win-win. You're really kind of avoiding blame there a good bit in the way that, well, actually interesting. You're not avoiding accountability part of blame, but you're avoiding the criticism. You're avoiding the tear them apart, rip at them, be aggressive. And
and if Neil continues not to do this to record, then maybe it gets a little bit sterner.
It's a different conversation 2 weeks in a row.
Yeah. That happens. That's another example from my parenting life. I'll tell my kids nicely, "Hey, honey, how about putting your dishes in the dishwasher?" "Okay, Dad." "Hey, I asked you to put your dishes in the dishwasher an hour ago, and they're still in the sink." "Yeah, I'll do it." "Sweetheart, this is the third time I've asked you, and those dishes are still in the sink."
You're in my house.
"Viv, put those dishes in the sink." "Gee, Dad, you don't have to be so mean."
Yeah. Seriously. It's so true. So how do we avoid this? Let's hit the last segment here, because I think you stuck with us this song. You're realizing the effects. You're realizing where it comes from a little bit. It's not coming from a good place. It's not coming with good effects, right? So how do we really avoid this? And here I think we're talking specifically not about the accountability, not about the explicit, agreements that we have, not about those types of things. We're really talking more about this harsher rebuke kind of components here. So this is where, and it was interesting, the first parts come from the article, and the last parts are from my brain. But I liked that they used the same word. I like to talk about antidotes to some of these concepts that we talk about. And I was just, as a side note, bunny trail, I love that they used that same language, whoever wrote this particular stuff, because it was like, yeah, that's right on. I love that, because when you think of these harmful effects emotionally, such that we're talking about shame, or such that we're talking about guilt, such that we're talking about today blame and rationalization, what's the antidote? Well, their antidote was compassion. Yeah, theirs was compassion, but mine was humility. Right. So
the antidote to blame is compassion.
Yep. Having compassion for the other person. Even when they did screw up, compassionate perspective kills any kind of rebuke. It kills any kind of condescension. It kills any kind of "I'm a winner, you're a loser." Any of those blame-shifting strategies.
You're right. And I think that's probably what we used in the examples just a second ago about the recording and the dishes.
Yeah.
When you first say that, you are being compassionate.
Yeah. It's tough being a kid. It's tough to remember these things that you have to do all the time in this daily activity.
And I think that's probably going back to maybe legitimate issues that you're having with somebody, versus just laying blame and, just to deflect it off of you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And that's why I came up with the anecdote being humility, because, if you're humble and you come at a situation, we're picking on Neil. Hey, Neil, I'm not as organized in the beginning of the show, and I recognize that, and I'm the host of this thing, and I realize that I need to have maybe a checklist to help you so that you actually push the freaking record button, man.
Humility is always a good thing.
Yes.
And expressing the fact that you're not perfect either in these kind of situations is
a good strategy.
Big. It's really big. It's really big.
You immediately set up. You don't have to be perfect, kiddo.
Yeah.
Even though I came to you 3 times today, I still don't expect you to be perfect. You might, as a matter of fact, a little strategy with parenting I do often. I like to make sure whenever I'm reprimanding, I won't say it that way. Not whenever. Every now and again I might get a good moment. I'll put it that way. But I purposely try to let the kid know, whether I'm dealing with Aaron or Adam, listen, matter of fact, just the other day I told Adam, I know I fail you all the time. That's what I said to my kid. I fail you all the time, and I do my best I really try to be the best dad that I can be. So I sometimes I come off too hard and I don't say things well or right. But I need you to know, man, when you were late for school, that's causing a problem for me. And boom, 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 and we went into the conversation that we've had many times over. But that does set up, okay, you don't have to be perfect. I'm dang sure not perfect, so I'm not going to expect that you're perfect.
Yeah. But I think there is a line you have to draw eventually.
Oh,
you
yeah,
know,
well,
maybe you can't fire your kid, you know.
Yeah, no.
But if Neil fails to record and you've talked to him about it 5 times,
Absolutely,
then maybe you got to find a new producer, you know.
Yep.
So it's not like I'm saying, "Oh, you always be nice," and you know, there's
Pollyannish
never any
naive
consequences and stuff like that. There's definitely consequences.
Definitely not talking about being Pollyannishly naive and passive.
Right.
I don't, in my therapy work with people, very rarely will you ever hear me kind of advocate for, suggest directly. Sometimes I do that. Anything that's passive. I won't say anything, but pretty much I'm not going passive on stuff. But I'm not going aggressive either.
Right.
You know what's in the middle of passive and aggressive? Usually people just don't even think about this word. What's in the middle of passive and aggressive? Aggressive and passive are the extremes. Where do we want to be right in the middle? You know, by chance?
The dash?
In the middle, between the two.
Passive aggressive dash.
Yeah, no, that's not what I'm talking about. Come on. It's assertive.
Okay.
Assertiveness. In fact, it might even be on my list. I'm not sure. Being assertive is what we really want to get to.
Right.
I'm asserting this issue. I'm asserting this limit. I'm asserting that we had this agreement, but I'm not being passive and laying down about it.
Right. Yeah.
But I'm not going to be aggressive, which can we say blaming somebody is to be aggressive?
Yeah.
I think we can.
I think you can, yeah. You know, I think it's a lot in the delivery, you know.
Understand in conflict, realize, and crystallize in your mind is the way I thought about this. Realize and really crystallize in your mind that there is, and I use this word, I put it in all caps there. And I don't use these words very often. Forever, everyone, no one, those permanency kind of words. But I actually thought a little bit about it, and I put that word here. Realize and crystallize in your mind that there is always a percentage of ownership for the conflict.
Extreme ownership.
There you go. What do you mean? Go real quick. Go a little further.
No, the book I referenced earlier. You know, we might read that one in our mastermind next.
Oh man!
Or I might read it and get pissed off because nobody else is reading it.
That is the way that it goes, isn't it? That's a little inside.
Yeah, Chris, you never read the book, man.
I know, man. He blames me. He shames me in our meetings, man. The way that we need to foster this belief is self-examination. So when you're thinking about, you know, the reality of crystallizing in your mind, the reality of really understanding that there's always a percentage. When you're in conflict with somebody, I mean, it might be 95%. I don't know. You know, you punch me in the face, I guess I could probably think about, 5% I may have said something terse or pushed a button that I know better to do. Sometimes it's very, very small percentage, but I would say when there's a conflict, man, and that requires self-examination, which absolutely destroys any level of blame. That's how you avoid this. You learn to self-examine.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? When in conflict, search for a win-win. It's a simple concept. You probably heard that before, but think about it. When you're really going at a win-win rather than a win-lose, I think most people know what I mean by that. You're not going to fall into blaming the other person. How are you going to help them win in this conflict that we're in or this situation that we've fallen in? If you're blaming them, you're not going to win. You're not going to get a solution. You just, like we said, one of the effects, you destroy intimacy. You destroy connection. You destroy problem solving. So if you're in a win-win mentality, that's going to prevent you from blaming. Instead of blaming, focus. Here's a cool word. And I've been thinking a lot about this lately. Curiosity. Be curious. Think about that. If if you show a curiosity with what's going on, I'm curious, Craig. You've been late like 3 times in a row. I'm just curious what's going on, man. Like, is everything okay? Let me check this out with you. So being curious is a great way to level out. I'm not blaming you. I'm inquiring. I want to know. I really want to understand here, what's going on. Courtney talks about on the show multiple times. You remember, Craig, how she said, what was her phrase? Minister to the pain underneath the behavior. I think that might be word for word.
Minister to the pain. Yeah.
Right?
Right.
She talks about that. Like, husband comes home from work. He's in a bad mood. He's going crazy. He's irritable. Okay, well, minister to. That's her language. Think about. Be curious about. Wait a minute. This isn't normally the way you come home. Like, you are terser than crap right now. You're like a little meanie. Well, I'm curious. Let me minister. Let me ask you about your day. Like, what the heck? Did some dog pee on your seat when you got in the car? Like, what happened?
Yeah, I think that probably comes, I think a lot of emotions probably are masks for the underlying condition, right? Yeah. I'm acting angry and hateful because I'm hurt.
It's called displaced anger.
Well, there's a term for it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Or it could be something else, but I'm acting this way because something else is going on at a deeper level and it's a protection mechanism or whatever.
It's hard to be curious when somebody's being pretty snarky to you.
Well, it is, but a lot of times I think stuff like that is probably happening. Something else is happening. So going back to the parenting example, if somebody's a jerk at school, I'll tell them there's something could be going on at home. Maybe their parents are.
You never know.
Arguing.
I've heard you talk about that before.
You never know what somebody else is going through, and they're coming to you with an emotion because they got some hurt going on in their life.
So the Psychology Today thing looked at it. I missed this one. I was frustrated with myself when I checked this. I'm like, of course, yes. You know what prevents blaming somebody? Recognize that you're doing it.
Yeah.
Recognize you're about to go off a cliff.
Yeah.
Self-examination, humility, pause.
Yeah.
What am I about to do to this other person?
That's right. There's a quote. I know I've talked about Frankel on the show before. Something about the space between the event and the reaction. I forget what he says about it. I'll try to look it up real quick. But yeah, if you can you take a breath or whatever, just a little bit of space between throwing that out there,
make all the difference in the world.
Goes a long way.
So reflecting on the purpose that the Blaine offers you, I thought that was interesting. Do you want to just win? Do you want to just be right? What is your purpose? Why are you telling this person, what they've done is wrong or blaming them in some way? What are you trying to gain? And that self-examination will prevent you from doing that most of the time. Self-compassion. We talked about that. Making mistakes. Avoiding global thinking. That was another weird one. I'm like, they loved global thinking in this article. Like, okay, look for your contribution to your own suffering. Again, it was that subconscious psychological thing they were talking about. Like, okay, to avoid blame, Craig, I'm going to look at my contribution to my own suffering. I was like, how do you, what? But it was worth mentioning because again, it gets to that self-explanation stuff. Yeah. Look for how you can be more constructive. It's a good statement. I loved this one. Be vulnerable. Yeah, I missed that one in my thinking when I was skimming my thoughts on this. Vulnerability prevents you from blaming the other person.
Well, I think you touched on it earlier. Hey, I'm not perfect either.
Exactly.
I make mistakes too. I mean,
tell your kid that
I did this when I was young.
Yes.
I missed the deadline once.
That
Whatever.
vulnerability is so disarming.
Yeah.
It's nice. The person's already probably feeling like, I screwed up. Dad did tell me already about the candy wrapper. But when you're vulnerable as a parent or as a boss or, in a position, it disarms that person. They can now come to you. You're approachable. So vulnerability is a I really liked that they had that on their list. Developing assertive communication. I mentioned that, actually. I didn't have it on my list, but I talked about it. And then being aware of negative self-talk and criticisms to yourself.
That's a good one.
Because when you're stuck on self-criticism, comes from an ugly place, and you're going to throw it at the other person.
Stories we tell ourselves.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
Right. Did you get your
I
thing?
did. I found it. So Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. We've talked about that on the last show. I think I did with purpose. Right.
Oh, that's the purpose, principles, and passion. Yeah.
Yeah. Frankl said, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom.
Yoy. That's one hell of a way to end the show, I think, today, frankly. It's
pretty good, right?
I don't
frankly?
Frankly, I don't think we could say
Get it,
any
Frankl,
better.
frankly?
Oh, I didn't. Frankly, Frankl, you said it perfectly. Absolutely, man. Listen, I hope you got this. This is a really common theme that people really do experience in your lives. It is all the time happening, sometimes in very small ways, sometimes in really big ways. I really want you to think about the effects that you have when you're engaged in this, and then really kind of match up with how can you really work to prevent this from happening in your life as much as possible. I didn't talk about it, but it occurs to me as I'm saying right now. This is going to happen. Don't beat yourself up. You're going to blame people. I don't want you to be perfect with this either. But give yourself some grace. Have a great week. We will see you guys soon. Take care.